Neural control and coordination. As you know, to maintain homeostasis in our body, the functions of the organ systems must be coordinated. Two or more organs interact and complement the functions of one another through the process of coordination. For example, the energy demand is increased when we do physical exercises for maintaining an increased muscular activity. The oxygen supply is also increased. The increased oxygen supply necessitates an increased respiration rate, heartbeat, and increased blood flow via blood vessels. The activities of nerves, lungs, heart, and kidney return to their normal conditions gradually when physical exercise is stopped. Thus, while performing physical exercises, the functions of muscles, lungs, heart, blood vessels, kidney, and other organs are coordinated. In our body, all the activities of the organs are jointly coordinated and integrated by the neural system and the endocrine system so that they function in a synchronized fashion. An organized network of point-to-point connections for a quick coordination is provided by the neural system. Chemical integration is provided by the endocrine system through hormones. In this chapter, you will learn about the neural system of human mechanism of neural coordination like transmission of nerve impulse, impulse conduction across a synapse, and a physiology of reflex action. Neural system. In all animals, highly specialized cells called neurons constitute the neural system which can detect, receive, and transmit different kinds of stimuli. In lower invertebrates, the neural organization is very simple. For example, a network of neurons are present in hydra. In insects, the neural system is organized better where a brain is present along with a number of ganglia and neural tissues. The neural system in vertebrates is more developed. Human neural system. The neural system in humans is divided into two parts. 1. The central nervous system. Second, the peripheral neural system. The brain and spinal cord constitute the CNS, which is a site of information processing and control. Associated with the CNS, the PNS comprises of all the nerves of the body. The PNS comprises two types of the nerve fibers, namely 1. Efferent fibers, 2. Efferent fibers. Impulses from tissues organs are transmitted to the CNS by the efferent nerve fibers, and the regulatory impulses are transmitted from the CNS by the efferent fibers to the concerned peripheral tissues organs. The PNS is divided into somatic neural system and autonomic neural system. Impulses from the CNS to the skeletal muscles are relayed by the somatic neural system, while impulses from the CNS to the involuntary organs and smooth muscles of the body are transmitted by the autonomic neural system. Further, the autonomic neural system is classified into sympathetic neural system and parasympathetic neural system. Neuron as structural and functional unit of neural system. A microscopic structure, the neuron is composed of three major parts, namely cell body, dendrites, and axon. The cytoplasm with typical cell organelles and certain granular bodies called Nissls granules constitute the cell body. Nissls granules are also present in short fibers which branch repeatedly and project out of the cell body called dendrites. Impulses are transmitted by these fibers towards the cell body. The distal end of an axon, a long fiber, is branched. Each branch terminates as a bulb-like structure called synaptic knob, which constitutes synaptic vesicles that contain chemicals called neurotransmitters. The nerve impulses are transmitted away from the cell body by the axons to a synapse or to a neuromuscular junction. The neurons are divided into three types based on the number of axon and dendrites, that is, multipolar, bipolar, and unipolar. The types of axons are present, namely myelinated and non-myelinated. Schwann cells envelop the myelinated nerve fibers which around the axon form a myelin sheath. The gaps are called nodes of Ranvier, which are present between the two adjacent myelin sheaths. In spinal and cranial nerves, myelinated nerve fibers are found. In autonomous and the somatic neural systems, unmyelinated nerve fiber enclosed by the Schwann cell is found that does not form a myelin sheath around the axon. Generation and conduction of nerve impulse. Membranes of the neurons are in a polarized state as they are excitable cells. Do you know why the membrane of a neuron is polarized? On the neural membrane, different types of ion channels are present. These ion channels are selectively permeable to different ions. When a neuron is resting, that is not conducting any impulse, potassium ions are comparatively more permeable through the axonal membrane and to sodium ions nearly impermeable. In the exoplasm, negatively charged proteins are present and the membrane is impermeable. Consequently, inside the axon, the exoplasm contains high concentration of potassium ions and negatively charged proteins that low concentration of sodium ions. In contrast, a low concentration of potassium ion, a high concentration of sodium ion is present in the fluid outside the axon and thus forms a concentration gradient. Across the resting membrane, these ionic gradients by the active transport of ions are maintained by a sodium-potassium pump which transport 3 sodium ions outwards for 2 potassium ions into the cell. As a result, a positive charge is present on the outer surface of the axonal membrane while its inner surface becomes negatively charged and is hence polarized. Across the resting plasma membrane, the electrical potential difference is called as a resting potential. You might be curious to know about the conduction of nerve impulse along an axon and the mechanisms of generation of nerve impulse. On the polarized membrane, when a stimulus is applied at B, the membrane at the site becomes freely permeable to sodium ions. Thus, a rapid influx of sodium ions is formed, followed by the reversal of the polarity at B, that is, the membrane's outer surface becomes negatively charged and the inner side becomes positively charged. At B, the polarity of the membrane is thus reversed and hence depolarized. Across the plasma membrane, the electrical potential difference at B is called the action potential and in fact it is termed as a nerve impulse. The axon membrane at B immediately ahead has a positive charge on the outer surface and a negative charge on its inner surface. As a result, in B, current flows on the inner surface. Current flows on the outer surface to complete the circuit of current flow. Hence, in B, the polarity is reversed and an action potential is generated. Along the length of the axon, the sequence is repeated and consequently the impulse is conducted. The stimulus-induced permeability to sodium ions rises and is extremely short-lived. This is quickly followed by a rise in permeability to potassium ions. Potassium ion diffuses outside the membrane within a fraction of a second and the resting potential of the membrane at the site of excitation is restored and once more the fibers become responsive to further stimulation. Transmission of impulses. From one neuron to another, a nerve impulse is transmitted through junctions called synapses by the membranes of the presynaptic neuron and a postsynaptic neuron. A synapse is formed which may or may not be separated by a gap called synaptic cleft. Synapses are of two types, namely electrical synapses and chemical synapses. The membranes of pre- and post-synaptic neuron at electrical synapses are in a very close proximity. From one neuron into the other, electrical current can flow directly across these synapses. Across electrical synapses, transmission of an impulse is very similar to impulse conduction along a single axon. Across an electrical synapse, impulse transmission is always faster than that across a chemical synapse. In our system, electrical synapses are rare. The membranes of the pre- and post-synaptic neurons at a chemical synapse are separated by a fluid-filled space called synaptic cleft. Do you know how the presynaptic neuron transmits an impulse across the synaptic cleft to the postsynaptic neuron? In a transmission of impulses at these synapses, chemicals called neurotransmitters are involved. The vesicles are present in the axon terminals which are filled with these neurotransmitters. At the axon terminal, when an impulse arrives, the movement of the synaptic vesicles towards the membrane is stimulated, where they fuse with the plasma membrane and release their neurotransmitters to in the synaptic cleft. On the postsynaptic membrane, specific receptors are present and the released neurotransmitters bind to them. Ion channels open by this binding, allowing the entry of ions which in a postsynaptic neuron can generate a new potential. A new potential developed may be either excitatory or inhibitory. Central nervous system. The central information processing organ of our body is the brain, and it acts as a command and control system. The brain controls the functioning of vital involuntary organs, voluntary movements, balance of the body, hunger and thirst, thermoregulation, circadian rhythm of our body, activities of several endocrine glands and human behavior. It is also the site for memory, intelligence, emotions, thoughts, processing of vision, hearing, and speech. The skull protects the human brain. The brain is covered by cranial meninges inside the skull, consisting of an outer layer called dura mater, a very thin middle layer called arachnoid, and an inner layer called pia mater. The brain can be divided into three major parts: forebrain, midbrain, and hindbrain. Forebrain. The forebrain constitutes cerebrum, thalamus, and hypothalamus. The major part of the human brain forms cerebrum. In the cerebrum, a deep cleft divides longitudinally into two halves, namely the left and right cerebral hemispheres. A tract of nerve fibers called corpus callosum connect the two hemispheres. Cerebral cortex is the layer of cells which covers the cerebral hemisphere and is thrown into prominent folds. Due to its grayish appearance, the cerebral cortex is referred to as the gray matter. The neuron cell bodies are concentrated here, giving the color. The motor areas, sensory areas, and large regions constitute the cerebral cortex and are neither clearly sensory nor motor in function. These regions are called the association areas that are responsible for complex functions like memory, communication, and intersensory associations. The myelin sheath covers the fibers of the tracts which constitute the inner part of cerebral hemisphere. They are called the white matter as they give an opaque white appearance to the layer. A structure called thalamus is wrapped around by the cerebrum, which is a major coordinating center for sensory and motor signaling. At the base of the thalamus lies another very important part of the brain called hypothalamus. The number of centers which control body temperature, urge for eating and drinking is present in the hypothalamus. Several groups of neurosecretory cells that secrete hormones called hypothalamic hormones are also present in hypothalamus. A complex structure called the limbic lobe or limbic system is formed from the inner parts of the cerebral hemispheres and a group of associated deep structures called amygdala, hippocampus, etc. It is involved in the regulation of sexual behavior, expression of emotional reactions, and motivation along with the hypothalamus. Midbrain. Between the thalamus, hypothalamus of the forebrain, the pons of the hindbrain, the midbrain is located. The cerebral aqueduct, a canal, passes through the midbrain. Mainly four round swellings called corpora quadrigemina are present in the dorsal portion of the midbrain. Midbrain and hindbrain form brain stem. Hindbrain. The hindbrain consists of pons, cerebellum, and medulla. Fiber tracts are present in pons that interconnect different regions of the brain. In order to provide the additional space for many more neurons, cerebellum has very convoluted surface. In the brain, medulla is connected to the spinal cord. The centers which control respiration, cardiovascular reflexes, and gastric secretions are present in medulla. Reflex action and reflex arc. When objects that are extremely hot, cold, pointed, or animals that are scary or poisonous, you must have experienced when a body part comes in contact, there is a sudden withdrawal of body part. To a peripheral nervous stimulation, the entire process of response that occurs involuntarily, that is, without conscious thought or effort, and requires the involvement of a part of the central nervous system is called a reflex action. At least one efferent neuron and one efferent neuron constitute the reflex pathway, which is appropriately arranged in a series. A signal from the sensory organ is received by the efferent neuron, which transmits the impulse via a dorsal nerve root into the CNS. From CNS, the efferent neuron then carries signals to the effector. As shown below, in a knee-jerk reflex, the stimulus and response thus forms a reflex arc. You should carefully study to understand the mechanism of a knee-jerk reflex, sensory reception and processing. Have you ever thought in the environment, how do you feel the climatic changes that take place, or how do you see an object and its color, or how do you hear a sound? All types of changes in the environment are detected by the sensory organs and appropriate signals are sent to the central nervous system where all the inputs are processed and analyzed. Then the signals are sent to different parts or centers of the brain. This is how in the environment you can sense changes. In the following sections, you will be introduced to the structure and functioning of the eye and the ear. Eye. In sockets of the skull called orbits, our paired eyes are present. In the following sections, a brief account of structure and functions of the human eye is given. Parts of an eye. In an adult human, the eyeball is nearly a spherical structure. In the eyeball, the wall is composed of three layers. The external layer is made up of a dense connective tissue called the sclera. The cornea is the anterior portion of this layer. The choroid is a middle layer which contains many blood vessels. Over the posterior two-thirds of the eyeball, the choroid layer is thin, but to form the ciliary body, it becomes thick in the anterior part. The visible colored portion of the eye is formed from the ciliary body itself, which continues forward to form a pigmented and opaque structure called the iris. A transparent crystalline lens present in the eyeball is held in place by ligaments attached to the ciliary body. The aperture surrounded by the iris in front of the lens is called the pupil. The muscle fibers of iris regulate the diameter of the pupil. The retina, which forms the inner layer contains three layers of cells from inside to outside: ganglion cells, bipolar cells, and photoreceptor cells. Rods and cones are the two types of photoreceptor cells. Light-sensitive proteins called the photopigments are present in these cells. The functions of cones are daylight vision and color vision, and the function of rods is the twilight vision. The rhodopsin or visual purple is a purplish red protein which contains a derivative of vitamin A and is present in rods. There are three types of cones in the human eye which have their own characteristic photopigments that respond to red, green, and blue lights. By various combinations of these cones and their photopigments, the sensations of different colors are produced. A sensation of white light is produced when these cones are stimulated equally. At a point medial to and slightly above the posterior pole of the eyeball, the optic nerve leaves the eye and the retinal blood vessels enter it. In that region, photoreceptor cells are not present, and hence it is called the blind spot. A yellow pigmented spot called macular lutea with a central pit called the fovea is present at the posterior pole of the eye and lateral to the blind spot. The cones are densely packed in the fovea, which is a thinned out portion of the retina. The visual acuity is the greatest at this point. Aqueous humor is a space between the cornea and the lens, and it contains a thin watery fluid called aqueous humor. Vitreous humor, a transparent gel, is filled in vitreous chamber, which is a space between the lens and the retina. Mechanism of vision. In rods and cones, the light rays in visible wavelength focused on the retina through the cornea and lens generate potentials. In the human eyes, as mentioned earlier, photopigments or the photosensitive compounds are composed of opsin, a protein, and retinal, which is an aldehyde of vitamin A. Dissociation of the retinal from opsin induced by light results in change in structure of opsin. Membrane permeability changes are caused by this. In the photoreceptor cells, as a result, potential differences are generated. A signal is produced by this that generates action potentials in the ganglion cells through the bipolar cells. By the optic nerves, these action potentials or impulses are transmitted to the visual cortex area of the brain, where the neural impulses are analyzed, and on the retina based on earlier memory and experience the image formed is recognized. The ear. Hearing and maintenance of body balance are the two sensory functions performed by the ears. The ear can be divided anatomically into three major sections, namely the outer ear, the middle ear, and the inner ear. In the outer ear, the pinna and external auditory meatus is present. In the ear, the pinna collects the vibrations which produce sound. The external auditory meatus leads inwards and extends up to the eardrum or tympanic membrane. In the skin of the pinna, the meatus, there are very fine hairs and wax secreting sebaceous glands. Connective tissues covered with skin outside and with mucous membrane inside are present in the tympanic membrane. Three ossicles, namely malleus, incus, and stapes, are present in the middle ear, which are attached to one another in a chain-like fashion. To the tympanic membrane, malleus is attached, and to the oval window of the cochlea, stapes are produced. The efficiency of transmission of sound waves to the inner ear is increased by the ear ossicles. The middle ear cavity is connected by the eustachian tube with the pharynx. On either sides of the eardrum, the eustachian tubes help in equalizing the pressures. The labyrinth, which is a fluid-filled inner ear, consists of two parts, namely the bony and the membranous labyrinths. The body labyrinth is a series of channels. The membranous labyrinth lies inside these channels and is surrounded by a fluid called perilimb. A fluid called endolymph is filled in membranous labyrinth. The cochlea is a coiled portion of the labyrinth. The membranes, namely Reissner's and the basilar present in cochlea, divide the surrounding perilymph-filled bony labyrinth into an upper scala vestibuli and lower scala tympani. Scala media, the space within cochlea, is filled with endolymph. The scala vestibuli ends at the oval window at the base of the cochlea, while at the round window which opens to the middle ear, the scala tympani terminates. The structure located on the basilar membrane is the organ of Corti, which contains hair cells that act as auditory receptors. On the internal side of the organ of Corti, the hair cells are present in rows. With the efferent nerve fibers, the basal end of the hair cell is in close contact. Stereocilia are a large number of processes that are projected from the apical part of each hair cell. A thin elastic membrane called tectorial membrane is present above the rows of the hair cells. A complex system called vestibular apparatus is present in the inner ear located above the cochlea. Three semicircular canals and the otolith organ consisting of the saccule and the utricle are present in the vestibular apparatus. At right angles to each other, each semicircular canal lies in a different plane. In the perilymph of the bony canals, the membranous canals are suspended. The base of canals is called ampulla and is swollen. It contains a projecting ridge with hair cells and called crista ampullaris. A projecting ridge called macula is present in the saccule and the utricle. The specific receptors, crista and macula, of the vestibular apparatus are responsible for the maintenance of balance of the body and posture. Mechanism of hearing. How are sound waves converted into neural impulses by the ear, which are then sensed and processed by the brain, enabling us to recognize a sound? The sound waves are received by the external ear, which directs them to the eardrum. In response to the sound waves, the eardrum vibrates, and through the ear ossicles, these vibrations are transmitted to the oval window. The vibrations are passed on to the fluid of the cochlea through the oval window, where in the limbs they generate waves. A ripple in the basilar membrane is induced by the waves in the limbs. The hair cells bend by the movements of the basilar membrane, pressing them against the tectorial membrane. As a result, in the associated efferent neurons, nerve impulses are generated. By the afferent fibers, these impulses are transmitted to the auditory cortex of the brain via auditory nerves, where the sound is recognized by the analysis of the impulses. Thank you so much for watching. Please share this video with your friends. Leave your comments below and please subscribe to my channel for more content. Click that bell notification that would let you know when a new video is uploaded. Thank you so much for watching. Once again, please subscribe to my channel for more content. For more videos, please check the description box down below.